Hey everyone, welcome back, and in this video we are going to understand data types. In the previous video we discussed one data type that was integer, right? int integer. But in this video let's just talk about all the data types that are available in Java. Now before we get started with data types, I want you to understand this flowchart, okay? So in Java basically we have two types of data types. One is primitive and another one is non-primitive. Now let's understand what's the difference between primitive data type and a non-primitive data type. Primitive data types are built into the language, okay? So like for example, integer that was already built into the language. So these kind of data types are known as primitive data types. And on the other hand, if I talk about non-primitive data types, they are like custom built using classes. And we'll be talking about non-primitive data types when we'll be starting with the OOPS and object-oriented programming and all that, okay? So in this video, I just want to talk to you about primitive data types, what are primitive data types, and all the primitive data types that are available in Java. Now primitive data types, as I already told, that are built into the language, right? So like we have already seen this int, right? This int we have already seen, which is a part of integer. Now let's talk about all the other data types that are available. Now first data type that we have already discussed as well, but I'll repeat, is int. Okay, now what is int? Int basically stands for a whole number, a number without any decimal points. Okay, for example, your age. Okay, so I can say int age like equals to 22. So this is a integer data type, right? And which is like correctly assignable to this age. Okay. Now in integers, like we cannot store any decimal value, okay? For example, what if I say like int, and let's say I say the value of pi is 3.14. Now as you can see, like 3.14 is a number, right? But 3.14 is a fraction number, is a decimal point number. And integers cannot store decimal point numbers, okay? So in integer, you can only store whole numbers, okay? And if you try to store this 3.14 into the integer, you will get an error because this is a fractional number. This is a decimal point number. So in integer, you can just keep whole numbers and that's integer, right? Now, what if you want to store some point or like some fraction into a variable? What you can do? So for that, we have another data type that is known as floating point, okay? So floating points basically refer to as the fractional numbers, okay? So what I can say, like for example, I can say float, okay, float float, then I can make pi, okay, and I can set it equal to 3.14f, okay? Now what is this f? I'll be coming right back to it. Now this 3.14 is a fractional number, right? And yes, I can store it to the pi because the data type of the pi is float. So integer can only hold the whole numbers, whereas float can hold the decimal point numbers as well. Now when you create a float in Java, you need to prefix that with f, okay, which basically tells the Java compiler that yes, it's a float number. So to generate floats, like you have to write a f at the end of the number, okay? So let's try to implement this integer and float in our code, and then we'll be moving on to another data types. So this was the code from our last video. So let's remove this code, okay? So as we have already seen, what I can do, I can say int age equals to like 22, which is completely valid. Okay, what happens if I say int and I say pi equals to 3.14? Now see, there is an error, correct? If I hover, it says required type int, okay? So what it is saying that, hey, I'm an integer and I cannot store decimal point integers, correct? So what we can do, we can store 3, we can store 4, we can store 5, but we cannot store any decimal numbers into the integer. In order to store decimal point integers, what we need to convert it to float, okay? Not float, okay, not flat, float. Then what I can do, like I can say pi equals to 3.14. But as you can see, I'm still getting an error, right? Because it says like here required type is float, but I'm giving it a double. So what I need to do, I need to press an F here to basically convert this 3.14 into float. Now as you can see, I'm able to keep decimal point numbers in the variable as well. So like, just to verify what I can do, I can say s out and go ahead and s out pi for me. So as soon as I run, you can see that I'm getting a 3.14 console.log in my on my terminal, correct? So this was h, like integer, right? And this was float, and where we can like keep the decimal points as well. Now here I want to show you one interesting thing, okay? What if I say integer, okay? I'm creating an integer. I say number, let's say num, a variable name num, and I set it equal to 5 divided by 2, okay? So 5 divided by 2 actually gives me 2.5, correct? But 2.5 is a decimal point number, and which we cannot store in the integer. So what do you think will be the output? Will it be an error, or like what can be the output? Technically you should have like, you should think like it should be an error, because 2.5 is a decimal point number and you cannot store decimals into the integer. Now see carefully what happens. When I run this program, I'm getting output as 2, correct? Like I didn't got any error, but I got 2. So basically what happens, the value 5 divided by 2 gets executed at the runtime, correct? Java doesn't know what will be the output of 5 divided by 2. It can be an integer, like what if I had a 4 here, right? Now the value will come 2 again, right? Which is perfectly fine. Now Java doesn't know what will be the value of this expression on the build time, but it knows on the compile time, basically when we run the program. So Java is not giving an error here. But what happens on the runtime, basically when you divide 5 by 2, the answer comes to be 2.5, right? But because we are storing this 2.5 into an integer, basically this 0.5 gets truncated and we are only left with 2. So that's why we are getting 2 here, okay? Similarly, what will happen if I if I replace 5 with 7, okay? So what should be the answer? So if I run, okay, so I'm getting 3. So technically I should get 3.5, correct? So it should be 3.5, but because we are storing the result in an integer, we are getting only 3 and this 0.5 is getting truncated. Okay, what will happen if I just convert this to float? Okay, I did nothing, but I converted this to a float. Now if I run the program, as you can see, I'm getting a 3.0 because I didn't typecast it to float. Let's do an F here. Okay, my bad, I forgot to put the F. Now just run again. Now let's see the result. Now as you can see, we are getting the whole 3.5 as the result. Similarly, what if we had a 5 here? So we shall be getting 2.5 as the result. So integers can only and only hold whole numbers, whereas float can hold decimal point numbers as well. Okay, so till now we have completed the integer, okay, and we have completed the float, right? Okay, now let's talk about another data type, that is Boolean. Okay, right here, Boolean. Now there are situations when you just want to store either yes or no value, correct? Like integer 1, 2, 3, floats the decimal point numbers. But what if you just want to store something like yes, no, or basically I can say true, false, okay? In coding terms, we call it as true, false. For example, let's say I want to store a data like are you subscribed, okay? So subscribed can be either yes or no, right? It can be either true or false. To store this kind of values like true and false, the Boolean data type is being used, okay? Let's see how we can use Boolean in Java. So what I can do, I can basically remove this code, okay? And I'll say Boolean, basically the data type is Boolean. Let's say I want to make a variable is subscribed, okay? So basically this variable tells me like, are you subscribed to my channel or not? Like something like that, maybe in YouTube and maybe any other platform. So what I can do, I can either set it to true, okay, or I can set it to false. Nothing more than that. There is no third option, either true or false, okay? If I try to set it to 1, as you can see, I'm getting an error because see, it says required type is Boolean, but you are providing me an integer. So Boolean can only store 2 types of values, true and false, okay? So true basically means yes and false basically means no. Now where we do, like what is the benefit of Boolean and where do we use Booleans? In the upcoming videos, we'll be doing some switch cases and we'll be doing some conditional statements, if else, and we'll be talking about loops. So you'll see that their Booleans are really beneficial. So as of now, you should know that what are booleans and what kind of values you can assign to a boolean. Okay, so let's try to system.out.println is subscribed. Okay, this boolean value, and when I run this, so I'm basically getting a true, which basically means yes, and if I set it to false, okay, and so I get the false here. There are more examples to booleans as well. Like for example, it says like send me notifications on email, right? Like we subscribe and unsubscribe to the notification service. So what we can do in the database, we can say boolean should send email. Let's say should send email equals to true. So basically what our server can do, or maybe what our program can do, check for this value. If this is true, send the user the email about the notifications, and if this is false, don't send the notification. So boolean values are responsible for keeping either true or false, basically yes and no statements. Okay, so we have completed integer, we have completed float, and we know what are booleans. Okay, now let's just talk about the another data type, that is character, basically char. Now a character refers to a single character. Like in English we have 26 characters, correct, from A to Z. So these are characters. So there are times where I just want to store a single character. Okay, so there I can use the char keyword, or I can say the character in Java. For example, like values like only the A, or maybe I can say only the Z, or any, like only single digit character can be stored in a character. Okay, so let me show you in the code. If I can, like I can remove this boolean, I can say char. Okay, basically a char, and like I can make a variable C, and I can set it equal to, let's say, just a single character C. Okay, now to assign a character, you need to like wrap your value with this single quotes. Okay, this single quotes, and you cannot have more than one value. Like if I say CA, you are getting an error, because a character can only store a single character, not multiple characters. So character is useful like in storing these kind of values where you just have a single character. So now you might be thinking like, what is the use of this character? Now when you chat, you have seen like you use emojis, right? So emojis, like a single emoji can be a single character. So that's how you can use characters in Java. Okay, so characters are useful, and like we'll be working on projects in the upcoming videos, and we'll see like how we can use characters. So character can basically store a single character, and the value needs to be wrapped in this single quotes. Okay, and similarly what you can do, you can basically S out the C, and then you can run the code, and as you can see, you are getting C. Similarly, you can store a 1 also, okay, which is not a number. Basically, it's just a character. You can store a which will like output A. So character single, like basically stores a single character in the memory. Now, basically, we have completed all those data types which are commonly used as a beginner. Okay, so we have covered integer, float, boolean, character. These are the most common data types that are being used. Now I want to show you one more thing. Like if I scroll down a little bit, and here is a table, right? And in this table we have basically 3 columns: data type, default value, and default size. Now I want you to pay really attention to this default size. What is default size and why do we need this? Whenever you store some value in a variable, okay, let's say I say like here integer age equals to 22. Okay, now what happens internally is basically a block is getting assigned, a block gets created whose name is age. Okay, basically a nickname, and the value is 22. Now this block, the particular block, acquires some memory from your operating system, from your machine, I can say. Okay, now this memory, basically how much memory it takes, depends upon the data type. Integer blocks takes different memory, bytes take different memory, booleans take different memory. So this table basically tells you which data type takes which memory. Okay, now why this is important, I'll be surely coming back to that, but let's just understand what this says. Now if you are working with a boolean data type, okay, a boolean, so the default value is false, which is okay. Its default size is 1 bit. Basically if like this is my code. Let's say I create a boolean here, A, and set it to true. So now the memory consumption of this particular program on the runtime is 1 bit, because there is one boolean. What if I make one more boolean, b equals to, like, let's say false. Now the memory utilization of this particular program is 2 bits because there are 2 booleans. When this code will run, basically what compiler will do, it will make 2 blocks for me, right, of type boolean, and name it as a and then name it as b, and like it will keep the value true in a, okay, and it will keep the value false in b, correct? So this particular block will take 1 bit, and then this particular block will take 1 bit, and the total size, like total RAM that our program is going to take is 2 bits basically, okay? So that's so boolean basically acquires 1 bit of the memory. So as much booleans you have, as like more memory you use. So on the second we have character. So character basically takes 2 bytes, okay? Now let me tell you the conversion of the bits and bytes. Basically 8 bits, okay, 8 bits make 1 byte, okay? And if you talk about characters, so basically a character takes 2 bytes of the memory, okay? So let's say what I do, I make a character here, okay, char, and let's name this character to be C and then C. So this particular character is taking 2 bytes of memory. Now when I run this program, what will happen? The total memory that will be consumed is 2 bytes, okay, plus 2 bits. Why 2 bits? Basically we have 2 booleans and 1 character. So a character basically takes 2 bytes and those 2 booleans will take 2 bits. Now you might be wondering, like, why are we even studying this? Why do we need to care about this? Is all internal implementation, right? On the big scale, like when you make your own projects, you should make a program which is memory efficient, right? You don't want to like waste so much of the memory. So you should know which data types takes how much memory, correct? Now another data type that we have on the table is byte. Basically we haven't discussed about byte, but we'll surely do. So let's take a look at int. So integer basically takes 4 bytes of memory on the system, okay? So if I make a integer variable like here integer age, so this particular block will be taking 4 bytes of storage, okay? Now you might be wondering who decides like how much storage is given to what block. So basically compiler design, the design of the compiler decides that. Maybe in JavaScript the memory allocation is different, maybe in C++ the memory allocation is different, in Java it's different. So every language has its own compiler and its own compiler design, and every language compiler decides how much memory a data type should have, okay? Similarly we have long, which is 8 byte, and then we have float, right? Just we studied. So float also takes 4 bytes. The only difference between int and float was the decimal integers. Now I want to show you one more thing here, okay? So we know that integer takes 4 bytes, okay? Now this is a limitation. Basically we cannot store more than 4 bytes in an integer. Okay, just see carefully. If I go to google.com, okay, google.com, where is my google.com, and I search range of integer in Java, okay? Now you can see that here one number is coming, a very long number is coming, that is like 21474836647, and then there is a negative 21474836648. Now what are these numbers? Let's copy these numbers, okay? I'll copy this, and what I'll do, I'll paste it here, okay? Let us change the font type. So this is the range. Now what I searched on Google was, what is the range of integer? So it says like from this to this. Basically what it means, a integer only have 4 bytes of storage, right? This we know. So we, like when I store this particular number, okay, this particular number on the in an integer variable, my 4 bytes gets consumed, okay? But what if I want to store like a number greater than this number? So basically I cannot do that. Why? Because memory is a limit, because integer only gets 4 bytes in Java. So I cannot store more than this number. Let's try to do that, okay? So what I'll do, I'll remove this. I'll say int, let's say num equals to, and let's try to like, you know, have a number greater than this. So I say 214, okay? Then we have 748, 3647, 364. Let's say I'll say 9. Okay, So now I'm trying to store a number which is greater than its range. So if I that hover on it, it says integer number too large. Basically we are getting an error. Now why are we getting this error is because a integer only gets 4 bytes of storage, and I'm trying to store a number which will take more than 4 bytes. So let's say s out, okay, and I'll say num. Let's try to run this program, okay. So as soon as I run the program, I'm getting an error that Java integer number too large, right? I'm not able to store this number in the integer. Now what's the solution? Like, you know, we are having really advanced computers and we can't just store this number in an integer. So what's the solution is we need something which is like having memory of more than 4 bytes, correct? So if I go back to the table, right? So as you can see, here was the integer, right? Which had 4 bytes of the storage. Now I want to store a number basically that can have memory of more than 4. So as you can see, I see a long here, right? A long, and which can store like 8 bytes of storage, which is obviously more than 4, the double of 4, right? So what I can do, instead of integer, what if I say long? Okay, long. L, okay, yeah, yes. So what I did, basically I converted this number to a long, okay. Earlier it was integer. Now what I did, this is the number, and I prefix it with the L, because like in the F, we like for the floats we do an F, for the long we do a capital L. Now this number is a long, and a long has a memory of 8 bytes, which is more than a number, and I can easily store this number in a long. Now when I click on run, as you can see, now I am able to get this number on the console. So basically, if you want to store a number which lies in this range, this particular range, you can use integer, correct? But if you want to store a really long number, so you should use the long basic data type in the Java. Now one thing, let's say I make long age, a variable age, and my age is like 22L, correct? And I print it on the console. So when I click on run, as you can see, 22 is there. So there is no problem in this code, as you can see, but this code is not memory efficient, right? Because 22 can be easily stored in an integer, in a 4 byte data type, but I'm using long here and I'm wasting up some memory of the user. So I'm taking 8 bytes of memory, but I only require 4 bytes, correct? So that's how you should always make programs which are memory efficient. If I had a large program, a big scale program, and I use long there, so ultimately my RAM will fill up and my program can crash. So always create programs which are memory efficient, and always choose data type wisely. So if you have a short number, so use integer. If you want to store a big number, so you should use long. Okay. Similarly, a float can store 4 bytes of storage, which is okay. But what if you want to store a decimal number which is really great, which is really large? So like for integer we use long. So for a float which is like a 4 bytes, you can use a double, basically which doubles up the storage to 8 bytes. And instead of F, basically you have to write at the end you have to prefix it with a D. So we know what is integer, okay, we know what is long, we know what is float, and we know what is double, okay. And we have also seen what are booleans, how much storage it takes. We have seen what is a character and how much storage it takes, okay. So similarly we have a byte and a short here. And what are these? Basically integer by default takes 4 bytes, correct? But what if I just want to store a single digit number 1 or maybe a 2? So 4 bytes is basically more than that, right? I'm still wasting up memory. So what I can do for really storing a short number, I can use short, okay, or a byte. For example, a movie rating. A movie rating is on a scale of 0 to 5. Now a user can never enter a number more than 5. So for that, I will recommend you to use a byte or a short, right? Why to use an integer? Why to even use 4 bytes? Because integer, in 4 bytes, you have so much of the range. So you will be end up wasting up so much of the storage. So always choose data types wisely. So these were some primitive data types that are built into the Java, okay? So I hope that these basic data types are clear. So we have boolean, we have characters, byte, short, integer, long. And for the floating points, basically we have a float and a double.